Hello, welcome to this presentation. This is an introduction to a series of videos examining the shapes and the names of the Greek alphabet's letters and asking questions about their origin and motivation. In 2008, Andreas Willey, a professor of comparative philology at the University of Oxford and fellow of the British Academy, wrote an intriguing paper called Cows, Houses, Hooks, the Greco-Semitic Letter Names as a Chapter in the History of the Alphabet. His article was published in the Classical Quarterly Journal by Cambridge University Press. In the first sentence of his introduction, Willey states the established view that modern European alphabets can be traced back through the Latin or Greek alphabet to a Semitic ancestor, known as the Phoenician alphabet. The Phoenician alphabet itself is believed to have been inspired by Egyptian hieroglyphs and developed from earlier Proto-Sinaitic and Proto-Canaanite scripts. The Proto-Sinaitic corpus comprises about 30 to 40 linear signs. These are attested in some 30 inscriptions from the el-Khadim site, published in detail by the renowned Egyptologist Alan Gardner in 1916 and by Roman Boutin from 1927 to 1936. Another two seemingly older inscriptions from the Wadi el-Hol site in the heart of Egypt, published by John Darnell and his colleagues in 2005, are also classified as Proto-Sinaitic. Several authors have compared the Proto-Sinaitic signs with their alleged hieroglyphic counterparts to support the idea of an Egyptian origin of the Phoenician alphabet. These comparisons are not always compelling. Some pairings seem arbitrary. These are indicated with red question marks. Geometrical or simple linear signs may well have been independently reinvented. Everybody can draw a straight or bended line, a zigzag, a circle, a spiral, or a cross without copying somebody else. The same is true for more complex pictograms representing humans or animals. Today, authors may express identical ideas without being accused of plagiarism. More specific similarity is required to affirm that a drawing is a copy of another. Practically all the Proto-Sinaitic signs have identical counterparts attested in Crete as hieroglyphics or linear A. The English Egyptologist Sir Flinders Petrie, who discovered the el-Khadim site and its inscriptions in 1905 and described them in 1906, believed that the Proto-Sinaitic signs did not descend from Egyptian hieroglyphs. "I am disposed to see in this," he said, "one of the many alphabets which were in use in the Mediterranean lands long before the Phoenicians selected the fixed alphabet. A mass of signs was used continuously from 6000 or 7000 BC until out of it were crystallized the alphabets of the Mediterranean. The Carians and Celtiberians preserved the greatest number of signs, the Semites and the Phoenicians kept fewer. The two systems of writing, pictorial and linear, which Dr. Evans has found to have been used in Crete, long before the Phoenician age, show how several systems were in use. In other words, Petrie suggested that the Proto-Sinaitic and Phoenician scripts were unrelated to the Egyptian hieroglyphs. They were distinct compilations of much older signs from the wider Mediterranean region. He implicitly considered Crete as a possible origin. This is a popular example of the el-Khadim script, perhaps because it is well legible or because some attempts have been made to decipher it, on the assumption that the signs are alphabetic and have Phoenician phonetic values. However, other interpretations are possible. All the signs but one can be read as Egyptian hieroglyphs, designated in red according to the standard Gardner's nomenclature, or as Cretan hieroglyphs in blue, according to the standard CHIC designation. The vial sign at position 4 on the stone has been abundantly attested in Crete, where it is dated to the same era as this inscription, or earlier, that is 2000 to 1800 BC. It has never been found in Egyptian hieroglyphic inscriptions or elsewhere. This evidence is sufficient to suggest that the el-Khadim inscription more accurately represents the Cretan script of its time than the Egyptian system. Here are the two lines of the Wadi el-Hol inscription transliterated in Cretan hieroglyphs or linear A signs. One of the signs, number 22, is not found in the current Cretan repertoire and can only be identified as an Egyptian hieroglyph. The other 27 signs, however, are confidently comparable to Cretan analogs. Sir Arthur John Evans, another British archaeologist and pioneer in studying Aegean civilization in the Bronze Age, excavated the Minoan palace of Knossos in Crete. Noticing the similarity of Cretan hieroglyphics and linear A or B signs with the Phoenician letters on the one hand, and with some Egyptian hieroglyphs on the other, he proposed that the alphabet did originate in Egypt, but was developed and spread through Crete. After all, he documented a large number of linear inscriptions and continuous writing activity in Crete, from the beginning of the second millennium to 1250 BC, when the palace was destroyed. By that time, the Cretan linear A script had spread to Cyprus. It continued to develop as a Cypro-Minoan syllabary until 1050 BC, when we conventionally set the appearance of the mature Phoenician alphabet. In contrast, the hypothesis of a Proto-Sinaitic ancestry of the Phoenician alphabet was challenged by the absence of evidence for intermediate developments for too many centuries, between the beginning and the end of the second millennium BC. The time and space gaps between the Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions and the first Phoenician alphabet were partially closed with the discovery of the Proto-Canaanite scripts. The most extensively documented is the so-called Byblos syllabary, also known as the Byblos pseudo-hieroglyphs, which constitutes the core of the linear Proto-Canaanite writing systems. In the late 1920s to early 1930s, Maurice Dunant discovered 16 texts of length ranging from 7 to 68 characters in Byblos, today in Lebanon. That is the place where the oldest Phoenician inscription was found. Based on some similarities with Egyptian hieroglyphics and his intuition, Dunant originally dated the inscriptions to the beginning of the second millennium BC. However, some of the items he found, like those at the bottom right corner, were inscribed with classical Phoenician letters on top of older pseudo-hieroglyphs, suggesting that both scripts were used in parallel for some time. Benjamin Sass criticized Dunant's hypotheses and dated the artifacts between 900 and 830 BC, that is 1 millennium later, and the Phoenician alphabet to 850 BC. Wikipedia dates the script between 1800 and 1400. The 10 longest inscriptions described by Dunant in 1945 contain a total of 1,064 characters. Dunant identified 114 distinct signs. Although this number may be somewhat overestimated because of graphic variation, the Byblos script is clearly not an alphabet, but it may well be a syllabary, like the Cretan linear A, linear B, or the Cypro-Minoan script. The Byblos script is exciting because it contains signs identical to Phoenician and Archaic or Classical Greek letters. Notably, it contains alpha, beta, gamma, epsilon, digamma, zeta, eta, theta, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, sigma, tau, upsilon, chi, psi, as well as an inverted omega and 7 modern numerals. If we agree on the origin of the Byblos script, we will have come close to identifying the origin of our letters and numbers, or at least the origin of their graphic design. Dunant compared the signs of the Byblos script with Cretan signs. He suggested perfect or almost perfect matches for 41 of the 114 signs. That is 36% identity between scripts. 1 in 3 Byblos signs has also been attested earlier in Crete. The blue asterisks indicate the Byblos signs, which Dunant matched to Cretan signs. Today we have more and better curated digital data thanks to a database by Esther Salgarella and Simon Castellan. It turns out that many more Byblos signs have exact Cretan counterparts. The total number of pairs rises to 63 or 55%. That's more than 1 in 2. As Flinders Petrie pointed out, old European signs like those of pre-alphabetic scripts had already been found around the Eastern Mediterranean by his time. Today, there is undeniable archaeological evidence of Neolithic or Chalcolithic cultures developing in the Balkans as early as the 8th or 7th millennium BC. About 700 linear signs found in various Balkan sites and dated to the 6th or 5th millennium appear to be abstract and non-pictographic. Their linguistic relevance is currently debated. Most scholars consider them to represent proto-writing or symbolic notation, not full writing. A digital inventory of old European signs, also referred to as the Danube or Balkan script, was created by Shan Wynn, professor of anthropology at the University of Southern Mississippi. Wynn pioneered research on the Danube script and authored the authoritative book, Pre-Writing in Southeastern Europe, The Sign System of the Vinca Culture, in 1981. The most prominent and prolific advocate for the linguistic value of the Old European signs is perhaps Dr. Harold Harmon, who specializes in the fields of language and culture, archaeomythology, and archaeolinguistics. In his book, Early Civilization and Literacy in Europe, an inquiry into cultural continuity in the Mediterranean world, published in 1996, Harmon compares the Old European signs with many other scripts, including Linear A and the Byblos script. Although he does not abandon the idea that the Greek alphabet was developed from the Phoenician, he posits that the latter was the product of interaction with Aegean writing traditions. In other words, the idea of a short alphabet may be Phoenician, but the signs used may be of Aegean origin. Many of the most abundantly attested Linear A signs are of Balkan origin. Harmon reports about 60 identities. The Cypro-Minoan script and the Cypriot syllabary have also borrowed Old European signs via Linear A or directly. Among the Byblos signs, Harmon identifies 4 of Cypriot syllabary origin, 7 from Linear A, and 20 Balkan signs. Accounting for the Cypriot and Old European signs found in the Byblos inscriptions, it appears that this Proto-Canaanite pre-alphabetic script mainly consisted of signs borrowed from Cyprus, Crete, and the Balkans at a frequency of about 2 out of 3. The influence of Egyptian hieroglyphs is nowhere near that frequency, if any at all. This ink writing from Tel Lachish, discovered in 2018 and published in 2021 in the journal Antiquity, is the earliest writing discovered in the southern Levant. It features a mere handful of letters written on a tiny pottery sherd. The sherd has been dated by radiocarbon to the 15th century BC, or the first part of the Late Bronze Age. It is regarded as the missing link between the earliest evidence of pre-alphabetic writing from the Sinai in Egypt, dated to the 19th century BC, and the corpus from Palestine, dated to the 13th century BC or later. Although the authors misleadingly name this script an early alphabet, the signs are more like Cretan Linear A than Phoenician letters. Moreover, the milk bowl bearing the writing was imported from Cyprus. Therefore, the signs are probably of Cypriot origin, not Proto-Canaanite. The most prominent archaeological feature of the Late Bronze II period of Tel Jama, near Gaza, dated from 1450 to 1200 BC, is a vast structure which may have served as a palace. At the same time, this settlement was the first to be fortified. A large quantity of imported pottery was found, including ware of Mycenaean and Cypriot origin. As Flinders Petrie reported, some of them featured trademarks that looked like alphabetic letters. The terminological ambiguity surrounding the use of pre-alphabetic, early alphabetic, and alphabetic may reflect underlying ideological or historiographical biases, rather than strict linguistic criteria. The application of labels such as early alphabetic or alphabetic to undeciphered or contested scripts, especially those characterized by an anomalously high or low number of distinct signs, is problematic. Scripts such as Proto-Sinaitic and Proto-Canaanite should more appropriately be categorized as pre-alphabetic, given their historical role in contributing graphical elements to the first fully attested alphabetic system, namely the Phoenician script. To characterize these scripts as alphabets, or even as early forms of the alphabet, is methodologically unsound. They bear no closer structural affinity to alphabetic systems than do undeciphered scripts such as Linear A or the Byblos script. This conceptual imprecision is exemplified by an article on a popular science website which refers to the Proto-Sinaitic script as an alphabet in its headline, despite the cautious position taken by the scholar interviewed, Philippa Steele, who explicitly states in the article's body, "We are not sure that it is related to the alphabetic system." Further compounding this ambiguity, the journalist references a fragmentary inscription from Syria, comprising merely 3 signs and predating the Proto-Sinaitic corpus, as potentially belonging to the earliest known alphabet. Such speculative assertions risk distorting public understanding and conflating scholarly hypotheses with established linguistic fact. A few more Proto-Canaanite inscriptions, found mainly in Tel Lachish, are dated to the 13th century BC or later. They are generally short and feature signs that are typical of the Byblos script, but absent from the classical Phoenician alphabet. A sigma-like sign which exists neither in the Byblos script nor in the Phoenician alphabet is perhaps a variant of the linear A sign A305 from Crete. The Khirbet Qeiyafa ostracon contains the longest inscription of its type. As Professor Yosef Garfinkel from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem points out, there are almost no other inscriptions from the same period or with this type of writing, which includes so many letters. All the signs of this inscription are signs of the Byblos script, and some are identical to Old European or linear A signs. A much shorter inscription, known as the ʼIšbaʿal inscription, displays 4 intact signs and 1 broken. It was recently found at Khirbet al-Ra'i. Once more, scholars and journalists have tried to associate this sequence with the homophone biblical name without knowing the script represented in the inscription and what language it recorded. Such fragmentary archaeological finds and speculative interpretations based on the Bible are then used by circular reasoning as evidence for the historicity of the Bible. Instead, assuming a European origin of the script and an Indo-European language, the grapheme sequence BOL could be interpreted as the Indo-European root of words such as the English bowl, and its cognates for a pot, cup, bowl, or a round vessel. This would make better secular sense in the context of an inscription on a piece of pottery describing the type and use of the artifact. It would be the kind of word one expects to find on pottery. For comparison, Garfinkel and his colleagues state that the Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions are the earliest evidence of the alphabet, and the letters are essentially pictographic. Of course, by the phrase earliest evidence of the alphabet, the authors mean the earliest evidence of a linear script, because the Proto-Sinaitic script is not an alphabet. We do not know what it is because there are too few and very short inscriptions. We do not know how many signs it comprised in total. Those that have been attested are by the great majority also attested in Crete at earlier times. Generally, the Proto-Canaanite inscriptions from Tel Lachish and surrounding sites may contain signs belonging to the Byblos script, Cypro-Minoan, or linear A. Occasionally, as is the case here, some Balkan-specific signs appear as Canaanite innovations. The ʼIšbaʿal ostracon inscription is of particular interest. According to Sass, the contents of the ostracon, except for a few words or parts of words, remain undeciphered despite numerous attempts in the literature. The nature of the text cannot be determined. There is consensus, nevertheless, that the bottom line represents a Semitic abecedary with some errors, committed by some incompetent scribe or a language student. However, there are more puzzles in this inscription. The preceding 4 lines are generally considered to be a random distribution of letters from scribal practice of the alphabet. They contain letter shapes not found in the abecedary, but are comparable to linear A. Unlike the mature Phoenician alphabet, this abecedary is written from left to right. Overall, the Phoenician alphabet was in the making phase by the mid-10th century BC, and other linear scripts were still in use. This is another inscription from Khirbet Qeiyafa, radiocarbon dated between 1020 and 980 BC. Reading pre-alphabetic inscriptions presents many interdependent difficulties. Is the stance, or the orientation of a letter, intentional and significant, or erroneous? When M is read upside down, it signifies a totally different letter, a W. The Greek gamma may be read as a Latin L. How should we read the text? Our guesses depend on our assumptions about the nature of the script, its chronology, and the language it records. Here the authors assume the text is Semitic and reads from right to left. They identify the letters Aleph, A, Shin, S, Bet, B, Ayin, O, and Lamd, L, at the beginning of the inscription, and the letters Bet, B, Daleth, D, and Ayin, O, at the end. They consider the vertical strokes as word separators and attribute the unexpected stance and orientation of some letters to the immaturity of the alphabet. In Semitic languages, the sequence ASBO reads ʼIšbaʿal, hence the name of the inscription, and the sequence BDO reads Beta. They restore the broken letters in the middle as Bet, B, and Nun, in, and read the whole phrase as ʼIšbaʿal, son of Bada. They validate their guesses, claiming that the name ʼIšbaʿal is attested in the Bible. Someone else may then use this archaeological evidence to validate, so to speak, the historicity of the Holy Book. Personal names abound in the translations of archaic inscriptions. They do not need to signify something. They do not make predictions and are immune to falsification. They are, in other words, unscientific speculations. What if we flip the inscription upside down and hypothesize that it was Greek? In position 4, the first two letters of the inscription are readily recognizable as the Greek letters alpha, A, and sigma, S. Their stance is perfectly correct. The letter sequences are the same as in the Semitic order, but must be read from left to right as ßbol and BDO. There is no need to guess any additional vowels between consonants. The separator strokes may be considered as iotas, I, or ignored. We may also ignore the broken letters in the middle. In ancient Greek, the letter sequence ASBO is always followed by an L. All the ancient Greek words starting with ßbol are cognates of asblos, or asbali, meaning shoot. The Greek S is always pronounced as sh. Thus, AS is phonetically equivalent to English ash. The word asbali is a fusion of the Indo-European root for ash with that for bowl. The compound word ashbol would mean bowl ash, that is soot. The end sequence, BDO, is found in a few compounds of molybdos, the metal lead, and the word kibdos, meaning dross, debris, rubbish, trash. All we need is for the broken letter before ibdo to be an archaic K. The Greek ashbol kibdos hypothesis makes secular sense. This pottery may have been destined to be used as trash for ash and burned debris, and was labeled as such. We may thus predict that traces of ash and burned materials should be found on the bowl's inner surface. We may also make a linguistic prediction. The letter sequence BOL, so frequently found in pottery inscriptions, is not for the Semitic word Baal, meaning Lord, Master, or some deity, but is of Indo-European origin and means vessel, bowl. In further support of this hypothesis, the consonant cluster alph, shin, the equivalent to alpha sigma, AS, is also found in Aramaic. It is pronounced like ash and means fire. The cluster ASB is also found in Middle Egyptian words related to fire, like those for fierce glowing of radiance or flames. In late Egyptian, however, which was spoken when the pot was created, the cluster SB was inverted into BS in the word for fire. Interpreting the rest of the letter sequence becomes even harder, assuming an alphabetic transliteration of Egyptian or Aramaic words in either direction of reading. In contrast, the cluster BOL forms the root of the Greek word bolos, meaning lump, clod of earth, soil, or clay. The modern Greek word sbolos, with the same meanings, matches even more with the inscription SBOL. The combination of ash, for fire, with bowl for earth or clay, makes up the sense of fired earth, like the Italian terracotta. Geographical and chronological links have been established between the Balkan signs and the early writing systems of Crete. Some signs in the Middle to Late Neolithic site of Despilio, northern Greece, date to 5,260 BC, plus or minus 40 years. Those from the first settlement of Philokopi on the island of Milos date between 2,300 and 2000 BC. Those from the sites of Troy, 4 and 5, dated around the beginning of the second millennium, are contemporary with the Cretan hieroglyphic script. Evans found some identities between signs from Philokopi 1 and Linear A. Professor Colin Renfrew argued that the signs from the Balkans and Troy may hardly be called writing because they were not succeeded by the development of a well-defined hieroglyphic script. But we should nonetheless recognize that the Balkan signs are not markedly different in kind from pot marks seen at Philokopi and elsewhere, and that the evolution of signs on the whorls has points of comparison with the development of early Minoan seals. The pottery marks continued to develop in Philokopi during stages 2 and 3, until the establishment of Linear A on the island. All the archaic and classical Greek letter shapes have identical counterparts among the Old European signs or the Linear A. Therefore, the various epicoric Greek alphabets may have been developed locally, borrowing older local signs. There is no need to assume a Phoenician or Egyptian influence. We have briefly discussed 3 hypotheses about the origin of the classical and modern letter shapes. Substantial archaeological evidence of sign similarity supports the Balkan-Cretan hypothesis. Still, due to their old age, the signs are too isolated to suggest some grammatical or phonetic structure required for a script. The Egyptian-Cretan hypothesis also has substantial archaeological evidence in its favor, particularly for the Cretan radiations, but lost support in the 20th century under the publicity pressure of the Semitic origin theory. The latter, the Egyptian-Sinaitic Canaanite hypothesis, reposes on very few isolated inscriptions and some somewhat dubious, speculative comparisons of phonetic values rather than shape similarities. It is, however, actively propagated in the literature by the quasi-totality of scholars who do not even mention the other two theories as alternative solutions. This table weighs the massive data for each pre-alphabetic script considered a candidate ancestor of the mature Phoenician, Greek, and Latin alphabets. The data are compiled and presented by artificial intelligence. Therefore, this comparison represents the current opinion in the scholarly literature. It is what the average, naive internet user learns about the origin of their alphabet. The factual data, such as the time frame, geographic range, and approximate numbers of inscriptions, total signs, and distinct signs, are about right. The columns script type, decipherment status, language, and key features contain mainstream opinions that are still debated. We note that the Egypt-Sinai-Canaan pathway hypothesis is based on fewer than 100 inscriptions, with a total length of less than 2,000 characters. In comparison, the Balkans-Crete-Cyprus pathway is based on more than 10,000 inscriptions, with a total length of more than 50,000 signs. Of course, the quality of the data should prevail over the quantity. The quality of competing hypotheses can only be evaluated by testing their predictions. A Semitic origin of the alphabet predicts that the original letter names should mean something in Semitic languages but nothing in Greek. A European origin predicts that the letter names are originally meaningful in Greek. In his paper mentioned in the introduction, Willi reviews the question of the letter names. There is undoubtedly extensive phonetic similarity between the two sets, but similarity does not indicate the direction of borrowing. Although the date of first attestation does not necessarily correlate with the date of creation, it is less risky to assume that a literary object was created rather shortly before it is first attested than long before it is first attested. The first attestation of the Greek names is in Plato's Cratylus, around 400 BC. The first attestation of the Semitic names is, paradoxically, also in a Greek text, the Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Bible between 250 and 100 BC. The Hebrew versions appear in the literature only around the 5th century AD. The idea that the Greek letter names mean nothing in Greek is traced back to a work called Preparations for the Gospel, written in the 4th century AD by the Christian polemicist Eusebius of Caesarea in modern-day Israel. Willi characterizes this argument as irrefutable. He may have implied that the absence of meaning in the Greek letter names would be an irrefutable proof that the alphabet was created for a Semitic language and was later borrowed by the Greeks. However, Eusebius does not prove that the Greek letter names are meaningless. He may simply ignore their meaning. That would instead be an invalid argument from ignorance, and the question of the alphabet's origin would remain unsolved. For Eusebius, the Greeks stole any truths they possessed from the more ancient Hebrews. Eusebius reports the actual original meaning only for a few letter names. Phi does mean mouth and res, head, as he claims. However, for most letter names, he invents meanings that build approximately meaningful mnemonics when read in the order of the letters in the alphabet. For example, the meanings of Alf, Bet, Gimel, Delth, and He yield the following compound meaning. Learning of the house, this is the fulfillment of the tablets. In other words, learning requires writing on tablets at home. Learning requires homework, or the homework is to fill tablets. Nonetheless, in his original Greek manuscript, Eusebius gives Greek meanings to the names Daleth as Deltos, He as this, and Xi as to live. Several scholars have diligently delved into the meanings of the Semitic letter names in the 19th and 20th centuries, comparing them with similar words from various languages and dialects. Such meanings are also listed in the Semitic Roots Appendix of the American Heritage Dictionary. This table compares the propositions of 9 contemporary authors with those of Eusebius in the dictionary. That the Semitic letter names mean something in Semitic languages is not as straightforward a statement as it may sound. With due indulgence, because the expressions may vary superficially, all authors agree on the meanings of the names for 7 out of 22 letters. That is about 1/3 of the Semitic alphabet. Modern scholars generally concur among themselves, yet diverge significantly from the interpretations offered by Eusebius regarding the meanings of at least 5 additional letter names. This discrepancy raises the question, have the meanings of these names undergone such substantial change since the 4th century AD? If so, how can we ascertain the original meanings of the letter names at the time of the alphabet's creation? At present, scholarly consensus exists for, at best, only half of the Semitic alphabet. The remaining 11 letters are characterized by ambiguity, ongoing debate, or in some cases, assertions that no Semitic meaning can be reliably attributed to them. This uncertainty prompts further inquiry. What are the origins of these enigmatic letters? Do their names carry plausible meanings in Greek? Might the highlighted yellow and red letters yield more coherent semantic value when viewed through a Greek linguistic lens? Eusebius, for his part, appears to have lacked both clarity and consistency in his interpretations of the Semitic letter names. Moreover, his etymological reasoning does not meet the standards of rigorous linguistic analysis and seems shaped by ideological motivations. So his conclusions about the transmission of alphabetic knowledge must be looked at with skepticism. Given these considerations, a re-examination of the possible Greek etymologies of the earliest letter names is both necessary and timely.